All right, tonight we are going over graphing quadratic equations. So graphing quadratic equations starts with being given an equation. It's going to be quadratic, so it's going to be something squared plus bx plus c. All right, and it's written in standard form that way. So we're always going to follow these 4 steps in order to do that. Here's step 1. Find the axis of symmetry. So remember from our previous notes, the axis of symmetry is found by doing this formula. Negative b over 2a, where b is the coefficient with the second term and a is the coefficient with the first term. The next step is find the vertex. So we find the vertex by using the axis of symmetry. Whatever value we get for the axis of symmetry, that becomes the x value, and that's the x value of the vertex. Then we plug in that x value into our formula, and we find the matching y value. That's going to give us the vertex, a point, xy. After that, we're going to fill in a table of values using our calculator. Okay, so we can plug in, if you wanted to fill in the table of values by hand, you certainly could, but if we use the calculator and the table feature, it's going to make our lives a lot easier. So we'll be using the table button. And then finally, we graph. So let's go ahead and start. We're going to follow these 4 steps for each one. Excuse me. Next, first one is axis of symmetry. Axis of symmetry. So remember that's our formula, negative b over 2a. Okay. Now looking at this example, y equals x squared, this is kind of a weird formula. Looking at the standard form, we usually have all of these terms. Y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. So if that's our standard form, we have some of the pieces, but we don't have everything. So if we're writing this, this is like saying y equals 1x squared plus 0x, because there's no x's, plus 0, because there's no constant with it. So our a value is 1, and our b value is 0. So we're looking at negative b over 2a, 0 over 2 times 1. You can put this in your calculator, but hopefully we know that 0 divided by anything is just 0. So the axis of symmetry is x equals 0. That means that our graph is going to be cut in half on the line x equals 0. Then we use that to find our vertex. So with our vertex, we're going to plug that into our formula. So if our formula is y equals x squared, we just do y equals 0 squared, or 0, creating the point 0 for x, 0 for y. So remember the first 0 comes from the axis of symmetry right here, and then the second 0 comes from plugging in the formula right here. So we have a vertex of 0, 0. So we can go ahead and plot that on our graph, 0, 0. And the axis of symmetry is just a line that divides it. So you really don't have to draw it, but if you want to, you can. For domain, let's think of numbers we can use. So these are the x values of our table. Usually you want to use a couple negatives, a couple positives, so let's just use these values. It's nice if you use smaller numbers, negative 2, negative 1, 0, 1, 2. So now we're going to use our calculator to actually graph these values. Now I'm going to use this calculator even though it's slightly different than the one that you have because it lights up. It's a little bit easier to see the screen. So we still, in both of our cases, we go to y equals, it's that top left little gray button, and we're going to plug in our graph, y equals x squared. So y equals x squared. And our quadratic equation for this is just that. It's just one term, y equals x squared. So if you want, you can go ahead and take a look at the graph, see what it looks like. Now, why might my graph look kind of weird? My window's off, so I can change my window. Not minus 10, negative 10, 10, 1, negative 10, 10, 1. My graph should hopefully look a little bit better there. Okay, and you can kind of see on this graph, the vertex is at 0, which is good, 0, 0, because that's what we found. Now, what we really want is the table. So there's not a button for table, it's right above graph. You hit second table. And now we can use these values to fill in our table. So when x is negative 2, our y is 4. When x is negative 1, our y is 1, 0, 2, 4. And we probably could have done this without the calculator because really we're just saying y equals x squared, so we're just squaring all of these x's. -2 squared is 4 and so on. But if you put it in your calculator, you get a positive, like for sure this is the answer. It's a good way to check yourself and know that you really are getting the correct values. So now that we have that, let's go ahead and plot our points on our graph. So -2, 4, -1, 1, 1, 1. Sorry, I wrote that incorrectly. That should have been a 1. And 2, 4. Okay. And then it's a parabola that's opening upwards. So the graph is going to continue to open up and out like that, like a big U or a happy face smile. Okay. And if we look on the graph on our calculator, they should look pretty similar. Yeah. Excellent. Okay, so now that we have this, we can name the domain and the range. So remember, the domain is all possible x values. Okay, so think about the domain, all possible x values that could be represented on this graph. Well, if the graph continues both to the left and to the right, x and y is left and right, it's going to continue forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. Remember what we call that? We call that all real numbers. All real numbers. Now our range is a little bit different. The range is all possible y values, so moving up and down. Notice the y values of this graph are only above 0. There's no y values underneath the x-axis. Nothing is less than 0. There's a vertex at 0, so there is a y value of 0, but everything else is greater than that. So for our range, we're going to say y has to be greater than or equal to 0. So we're hitting back on domain and range. We did this a while ago with linear equations, but it's good that we're getting some review of domain and range for continuous functions because we struggled with that a little bit the first time. All right, let's take a look at the next one. Actually, let's skip down to number 3. Let's see number 3. All right, for this one, axis of symmetry, so -b over 2a. b in this case is -8. So if we have -8, that just becomes +8 over 2a. A is -1, so 2 times -1. We said a double -8 becomes a +8 over -2, gives us -4. So our axis of symmetry is x equals -4. So if you want, you can go ahead and put an axis of symmetry at -4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Just means that our graph is going to be symmetric across that line. Our vertex we find using that value, so we're going to say -4 squared minus 8 times -4 minus 17. And notice how since there was a negative in front of x squared, I kept that negative on the outside. So when you put this in your calculator, it's going to end up looking like -16 because it's -4 squared minus 8 times -4 minus 17. So really you could type out that entire thing. I recommend that. And we find that it's -1. So our vertex is the axis of symmetry, -4, and the point we found, -1. So let's plot that, -4, -1. Notice our vertex is always on our axis of symmetry. Okay, let's fill in a table. All right, for this ones, instead of just using the ones we used previously, -2, -1, 0, 1, 2, I'm going to give you more specific ones. If our axis of symmetry is at -4, let's make that our middle x value. And then I'm going to add one, so -3, add another one, -2. And in this direction, I'm going to subtract one, so -5, -6. So for this value, pick your axis of symmetry. Okay. So since our axis of symmetry was -4, we're going to say that this term is -4. And then in this case, you just add 1, and these two you subtract 1, subtract 1. All right, let's plug in our calculator, see what this thing looks like. Let's go to y equals, clear out everything. We're going to plug in our original equation. -x squared minus 8x minus 17. Oops. We can take a look at the graph. All right, and let's take a look at the table. Second graph. Let's fill in the values that they gave us. So -6 will go to -5. -5 goes to -2, then -1, -2, and -5. So we should hopefully be noticing a pattern. Some of these values are repeating, like I've got -5 and -5. Then I have -2 and -2, and then 1's in the middle. So let's plot these points. We've got -6, -1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then -5, -2. We already have -4, -1. Then we're going to pick -3, -2, and -2, -5. So this parabola is opening downwards, since it's a negative quadratic equation. And we see it looks like that. So let's talk about domain and range. Domain is the x value, so left and right. The graph is continuously moving left and right forever and ever. So we're going to say it's all real numbers. The range is the set of y values. So y, we should think up and down. Notice there's nothing above the vertex. The vertex is kind of like an ending point for the domain. The vertex is at -1, so there's nothing above -1. It's everything less than -1. So y is less than or equal to -1. We'll say it's equal to because there is a point on -1. That's the vertex. So our graph is good to go for number 3. Okay, let's take a look at number 2. I would like you to find the axis of symmetry and the vertex. So do your work on your own, pause the video, and then come back and check your answer. Go ahead and pause the video now. Okay, here we have our axis of symmetry is -1, vertex is -1, 4. So now we're going to create a table of values. Remember what I said before, this middle x value, use the axis of symmetry. So let's make that -1. The next two, we're going to add 1, so 0, add another 1, so 1. And then in the other direction, we're going to subtract 1, so -2, and subtract 1, so -3. Okay. Now go ahead and plug into your y equals and complete the table and graph. So you're going to complete the table and graph according to your table and your calculator, and then we will check our answer in a minute. Pause the video now. Here is our table of values. Again, we should notice a pattern, 8 and 8, and then 4 and 4. Going to match up. Our graph is a positive parabola opening upward, like a U, and our domain continues both directions forever, so all real numbers. And our range is everything above 4, okay? And noticing the range comes from the vertex. So y is greater than or equal to 4. It's always going to be that y value telling you where to go. All right, so that's it for notes. Make sure you ask questions while you're completing the practice, and good luck.